Brutal fight between Hamilton and Lando Norris after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. This is probably the first time you're hearing about this news, so I urge you to stay until the end before talking about it with your friends, because every detail matters. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. The 2025 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix was always destined to be a thriller. The Jeddah Corniche circuit, narrow, blindingly fast, with barriers looming like walls of steel, had already built a reputation as a place where chaos was not a possibility but a certainty. Add to that the intense heat shimmering off the tarmac, the neon-lit skyscrapers casting long shadows over the track, and a paddock swirling with rumors about future contracts, retirements, and shifting alliances. And you had a pressure cooker ready to explode. But no one, absolutely no one, could have foreseen the emotional firestorm that would erupt between two of Britain's most celebrated sons, Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris. The signs were there even before the 5 red lights went out. Hamilton, dressed in the blood-red colors of Ferrari in what he had already announced would be his final season, carried the calm intensity of a man racing against time itself. Lando Norris, on the other hand, youthful, hungry, and carrying the hopes of a McLaren resurgence on his shoulders, was under his own immense pressure to deliver. Both men needed, the result tonight. Neither was willing to yield. The stage was set. The stakes were sky high. And the drama, when it arrived, hit like a thunderclap. As the lights blinked off and 20 cars launched into the Saudi night, Hamilton's start was electric. Like a coiled spring unleashed, he catapulted off the line from P4, threading the needle with surgical precision between Norris and Verstappen as they barreled towards the notorious Turn 1 complex. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, Hamilton had the advantage, the line, the momentum, the promise of seizing track position early. But Lando Norris, perhaps sensing the critical moment slipping through his fingers, reacted instinctively and ruthlessly. As they hurtled toward the corner, Norris edged sharply to the left, crowding Hamilton closer and closer to the brutal concrete barriers. Lewis, with milliseconds to decide, refused to surrender immediately. He held his ground until the absolute limit, until the Ferrari was half on the curb, its suspension shuddering violently across the serrated surface. Only then, with the wall mere inches away, did Hamilton lift off the throttle, the snap of his momentum sending a spray of sparks trailing behind him. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Inside the Ferrari cockpit, fury ignited. The radio crackled to life, filled with the unmistakable sharpness of a driver who had just been wronged. Did you see that? Lando just shoved me off the bloody track. That's unacceptable, mate. Absolutely unacceptable. His race engineer, trying to keep him calm, responded with a clipped, neutral tone. Copy, Lewis. Incident noted by race control. But to Lewis, the 7-time world champion, the man fighting not just for podiums but for the perfect farewell season, that was nowhere near enough. As Hamilton tried to regain his rhythm, dropping back to P6, the paddock buzzed with tension. Replays showed the crowding maneuver again and again, drawing heated debates on team radios, on commentary booths, and across social media, where hashtags like #JusticeForLewis and #HardRacing immediately began trending globally. Yet the storm was only beginning. By lap 27, after a masterclass in controlled aggression, Hamilton had clawed his way back into striking distance. The Ferrari, balanced and viciously fast in clean air, hunted the McLaren with relentless purpose. Every lap, every sector, Hamilton reeled Norris closer, the gap shrinking by tenths, then by hundredths. Coming into turn 8, a sweeping left-hander taken almost flat out, where bravery and commitment decide races, Lewis pounced. He dove down the inside with a move that was bold, clean, and crucially, marginally ahead before turn-in. But Norris, in no mood to play diplomat, slammed the door shut. There was a sickening moment of light contact, not enough to spin either car, but enough to unsettle Hamilton just as he tried to balance speed and grip on the razor's edge. The Ferrari was forced violently wide, scraping along the outside wall in a dazzling spray of sparks and shredded carbon fiber. From the onboard camera, you could see Hamilton's hands wrestling the wheel with impossible finesse, somehow preventing what should have been a race-ending crash. But the damage was done. Momentum lost. 2 positions surrendered instantly. DRS range? Gone. Chance at the podium? Slipping through his fingers like desert sand. Hamilton's voice came back on the radio, a mixture of volcanic anger and sheer heartbreak. That's ridiculous. He turned in on me. Come on, man, what are we doing here? The incident was immediately placed under investigation, but in the volatile politics of modern Formula One, justice was anything but certain. As fans watched breathless, replays showed every possible angle, slow motion, from above, from Hamilton's halo cam, from Norris's rear wing. Pundits debated furiously. Was it hard racing? Was it dangerous? Should there be a penalty? Meanwhile, on track, Hamilton, nursing slight but crucial damage to his floor and side pod, continued to fight with every ounce of his legendary determination. He was battered but unbroken. In interviews after the race, his eyes still flashing with residual adrenaline, Hamilton refused to mince words. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. I respect hard racing, he said, voice tight with emotion. But what happened today crossed a line. There's racing hard, and there's racing recklessly. Today, it wasn't racing hard. It was desperate. Norris, facing his own wave of scrutiny, shrugged off the incident with a smirk that only further enraged Hamilton's legion of fans. It's racing, mate, Lando said, half laughing. If you leave the door open, don't be surprised when it gets slammed shut. The fallout was immediate. Ferrari lodged an official protest, demanding a post-race review. McLaren, naturally, countered with footage showcasing Hamilton's own aggressiveness earlier in the weekend. The headlines wrote themselves. Civil War, Hamilton versus Norris tears Britain apart in Saudi stunner. Lewis furious after Lando clash, unacceptable. Respect or rivalry? Norris and Hamilton explode in Jeddah. And in the grandstands, the fans, those eternal passionate arbiters of right and wrong, were split straight down the middle. Some cheered Norris's audacity. Others chanted Hamilton's name into the balmy Arabian night, a symphony of loyalty that echoed against the skyscrapers. One thing, however, was beyond dispute. On that humid night under the blazing lights of Jeddah, Formula One wasn't just a sport. It was war. It was pride. It was heartbreak. It was two gladiators refusing to back down, even when the consequences burned like fire. And for those lucky enough to witness it, it was utterly spectacularly unforgettable. Hamilton's anger was volcanic, a raw, feral thing that crackled through the radio like an electrical storm barely contained. His breathing, usually measured even under the most intense circumstances, came now in ragged, heavy bursts. Every syllable he uttered over the team radio was a bullet, fired with precision and fury. That's twice now. Twice. He forced me off again. This isn't racing anymore. This is dangerous. We need to file a protest. We have to report this. This is beyond aggressive driving, man. This is putting lives at risk. His voice, sharp and furious, echoed back in the ears of his engineers, who exchanged worried glances on the pit wall. They had heard Hamilton furious before, many times in fact, but tonight, the intensity in his voice carried something different. It wasn't just professional indignation, it was personal. As the final laps unfolded under the floodlights, the tension remained unbearable. Every camera feed flicked nervously between the two cars, Hamilton in his Mercedes and Norris in his McLaren, fighting, clawing, skimming inches apart, lap after lap. It was a duel dripping with animosity, and when the checkered flag finally waved in the humid night air, the order was agonizingly close. Norris claimed an electrifying P3, punching the air in exhausted triumph, while Hamilton crossed the line P4, so close he could have reached out and touched the papaya-orange McLaren, if not for the bitter reality separating them. Inside his cockpit, Hamilton didn't celebrate. He didn't even acknowledge the end of the race. His gloved hands remained locked on the steering wheel, knuckles white from the force of his grip. His helmet visor, though down, couldn't hide the way he was seething underneath. The entire paddock could feel it, a simmering storm ready to break loose. When he pulled into park firm, he wasted no time. The moment the car switched off with a mechanical sigh, Lewis leapt out with an energy that was almost frightening. Helmet still on, visor still down, he stormed across the tarmac towards Lando Norris, who was just clambering out of his own car, still high on adrenaline and oblivious to the confrontation racing toward him like a freight train. The crowd of photographers and crew members barely had time to react. Hamilton ripped off his helmet in one swift, furious motion, his face flushed red with rage, beads of sweat glistening under the brutal paddock lights. His eyes, normally controlled, almost cold in their racing focus, now burned with a fire that could have melted steel. Without hesitation, he closed the distance, planting himself directly in front of Norris, nearly chest to chest. His voice was sharp enough to cut glass as he snapped. "You think that was racing? Seriously? Pushing someone off the track not once, but twice? What the hell was going through your head, Lando?" The raw emotion in his voice wasn't just anger, it was betrayal, disbelief, the outrage of a veteran racer who had spent a career fighting fair, only to be treated with reckless disregard. Norris, who had barely caught his breath from the race, stumbled back a half step, surprised by the ferocity aimed his way. But true to his nature, pride flared in him too. He pulled off his gloves with a flourish, tossing them onto the McLaren cockpit, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "It's racing, Lewis. Hard racing." Norris shot back, voice rising to match Hamilton's fury. "You know that better than anyone. You had space. You could have backed out if you wanted. You chose to stick it out." The paddock around them had frozen, people holding their breath, pit crews, engineers, and officials staring in stunned silence. TV cameras swung around, capturing every micro-expression, every tense gesture, every spark of emotion flying between two of the sport's biggest stars. Hamilton's jaw clenched so tight you could see the muscles pulsing beneath his skin. He took a menacing half-step forward, pointing an accusatory finger at Norris's chest. "Backing out," he hissed. "That's what you're going to stand there and tell me? That I should have backed out when you forced me off track twice? That's your defense? That's not racing, Lando, that's desperation. That's risking both our races and our lives." For a fleeting second, it looked as if it might escalate further. The tension between them was electric, a razor-thin thread stretched to the breaking point. Lando squared his shoulders, refusing to be intimidated, though a flicker of doubt crossed his features. A small ripple of uncertainty. He had idolized Hamilton once, watched his breathtaking moves, his fearless overtakes, his command of the grid, and now here he was, being accused by that same icon of reckless endangerment. The shouting match hung in the heavy air, the paddock buzzing with barely concealed fascination. Team bosses watched from the edges, wary. FIA officials whispered urgently into headsets. But still no one moved to intervene. They all understood. This confrontation had to burn itself out before anyone dared step between them. Hamilton's breathing finally slowed, just slightly. The raw, molten fury that had fueled him began to cool into something heavier. Profound disappointment. "You're better than that," he said quietly, voice hoarse now, almost broken. "At least I thought you were." With that, Hamilton turned sharply on his heel, jamming his helmet under his arm, and stormed away, leaving Lando standing there speechless, hands still half raised in a defensive posture. The cameras didn't miss a thing. Nor did the fans, millions of them, glued to their screens, witnessing one of the rawest, most emotionally charged confrontations the sport had seen in years. Social media exploded within seconds. Hashtags like #Hamilton vs. Norris, #RacingRespect, and #Paddock Drama trended worldwide in a frenzy. Back in the Mercedes garage, Toto Wolff wore a grim, unreadable expression. At McLaren, Zak Brown muttered something to an aide, face pale under the bright lights. The aftermath of the battle wasn't just about points or podiums anymore. It was about honor. It was about legacy. It was about the brutal, soul-bearing realities of what happens when titans collide, and neither one is willing to give an inch. And the war was far from over. Hamilton's laugh, if it could even be called that, was a jagged, bitter sound, nothing like his usual warm chuckle. It was a harsh, humorless crack that sliced through the tense post-race atmosphere like shards of broken glass. "Backed out." Lewis snarled, his voice sharp, cutting, filled with incredulous fury. His dark eyes bored into Lando Norris, who stood barely a foot away, unflinching. "You turned in on me at turn 8 like I wasn't even bloody there. You're lucky I didn't end up buried in the wall, mate. That's not racing, that's reckless. That's dangerous." Around them, the chaos of the paddock seemed to still for a moment, like the universe itself was holding its breath. Engineers and media personnel glanced nervously at the confrontation unfolding before them, some pretending to be busy, others shamelessly watching, unable to tear their eyes away. Norris, his racing suit still half-zipped down to his waist, crossed his arms over his chest with a nonchalant swagger, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. It was the kind of cocky, almost defiant smirk that had earned him both fans and critics throughout the paddock. "Maybe," Norris drawled, shrugging with a mock innocence that made Hamilton's blood boil, "you're just not used to someone actually standing up to you." The words hung in the air like a match tossed into dry tinder. Hamilton's jaw tightened, the tendons in his neck visibly flexing. His next step forward was deliberate, aggressive, collapsing the small gap between them. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost a growl, yet far more dangerous than if he had been shouting. "Keep that mouth running, kid," Lewis said, voice dripping with venom. "You're not half the driver you think you are." The tension was unbearable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Both men stood toe-to-toe, two alphas on a collision course, each daring the other to flinch. A murmur rippled through the surrounding team members and journalists, a live wire of shock and anticipation. But before the powder keg could ignite fully, FIA officials, clad in their crisp uniforms, hurriedly intervened, physically stepping between the two fuming drivers. Gloved hands gently but firmly pressed against chests, pushing them apart, while stern warnings were issued under tight, urgent voices. But the damage was already done. The psychological blow had landed. The paddock could feel it. The rivalry, once playful, once sprinkled with jokes and social media banter, had mutated into something darker, more volatile. A Cold War was brewing, and the season had just found its newest, most explosive subplot. Minutes later, Hamilton, still seething, his face a portrait of barely contained rage, stormed through the pristine corridors of the Ferrari garage, scattering stunned mechanics and engineers in his wake like leaves in a storm. His racing boots slammed against the floor with each furious step, gloves clenched in his fists so tightly that the leather strained against his knuckles. Bursting into the debrief room, he didn't wait for pleasantries. He didn't wait for protocol. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Frederick Vasseur, who had only just returned from the pit wall and was still shrugging off his headset, looked up sharply as the door was flung open. The Frenchman had seen Hamilton furious before. Anger was almost part of the job description at this level. But this was something else. This was betrayal. Hamilton slammed his gloves onto the sleek carbon fiber tabletop with a crack that echoed off the sterile white walls. "Why the hell didn't we protest that?" he bellowed, his voice a thunderclap that made some of the junior engineers flinch. "Twice he forced me off. Twice. In turn 8 and again at turn 12. Where was the team? Where was the bloody protest to race control?" His words came in rapid-fire bursts, barely allowing himself to breathe between accusations. Vasseur, ever the diplomat, instinctively raised his hands in a calming gesture, trying to prevent the situation from spiraling even further. His mind raced, strategies, PR optics, FIA penalties, all flashing before his eyes as he tried to calculate the best response. "Lewis, listen to me," Vasseur started, his voice low but firm, the French accent heavier under stress. "We reviewed it in real time. We considered a protest. But race control was already looking at it. They ruled it a racing incident." Lewis slammed a fist onto the table again, rattling water bottles and data pads. "Racing incident?" he spat, incredulous. "If it were the other way around, if I had turned into him, they would have handed me a 10-second penalty before I even got back to the pits." The room was dead silent, the only sound the low hum of computers running in the background. Engineers and strategists exchanged anxious glances, no one daring to speak. Hamilton ran both hands over his face, pacing like a caged lion. His mind was racing, replaying every millisecond of those corners, every missed opportunity where he felt his team should have fought harder for him. He wasn't just angry at Norris. He was angry at the system, at the perception, at the feeling that he was standing alone. Vasseur stepped closer, voice dropping into a softer, more personal tone. "I understand, Lewis. I do. But we have to think long-term. If we push race control too hard without solid ground, we risk the stewards turning against us in future decisions. The FIA remembers. Always." Hamilton stopped, chest heaving, glaring at Vasseur as if weighing every word, every ounce of loyalty. After a long taut pause, he picked up his gloves with slow, deliberate movements. "Long-term," he muttered bitterly, shaking his head. "I don't have the luxury of long-term anymore." He stalked out of the room without another word, leaving a heavy silence, and a heavy reckoning in his wake. Outside, social media was already ablaze. Clips of the near collision at turn 8 were circulating at breakneck speed. Hashtag Hamilton versus Norris was trending worldwide within minutes. Pundits, former drivers, and armchair experts alike weighed in, their opinions as divisive as the incident itself. Some hailed Norris for standing his ground against a legend. Others slammed him for dangerous driving, accusing him of disrespect. Some questioned Ferrari's political impotence compared to Red Bull or Mercedes. And as night fell over the paddock, the battle lines were drawn. This wasn't just another chapter in the season. This was personal now. For Lewis Hamilton, the fight was no longer just for points or podiums. It was for respect. For legacy. For the very soul of his final seasons in Formula One. And he wasn't going down quietly. Inside the crimson heart of the Ferrari motorhome, the atmosphere was suffocating. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed harshly as the thick silence settled over the assembled engineers, strategists, and mechanics. It wasn't the physical heat, although the muggy afternoon clung to the air like a damp blanket, but the emotional temperature that made the walls feel as though they were closing in. Lewis Hamilton stood at the center of it all, every muscle in his body coiled tight with frustration. His racing suit, half unzipped and hanging from his waist, was streaked with sweat and grime, a visceral testament to the war he had just waged on track. His gloves, still clutched in one hand, shook slightly, not from exhaustion, but from unspent rage. "No, Fred," Hamilton said, his voice low at first but growing sharper with every word, slicing through the tension like a knife through silk. "No more, we'll review it. No more, we'll discuss it in the debrief." We needed to act immediately. He took a step closer to Fred Vasseur, Ferrari's team principal, his usually composed demeanor cracking into something raw, something volcanic. The engineers standing nearby, some still clutching clipboards or headsets, exchanged nervous glances but kept their heads down, pretending to study data screens or fidget with equipment that needed no adjusting. No one dared interrupt him. "If it had been me doing that to him," Hamilton continued, his voice now a mix of disbelief and fury, "I'd have a drive-through penalty slapped on me before I even made it to the next bloody corner." The accusation hung heavily in the air, undeniable and searing. "We've got to stop being polite." He practically roared now, slamming his gloves onto the nearest counter with a sharp, echoing thud. "I need this team to fight for me the way I'm fighting out there, every damn lap, every corner, every millisecond." Vasseur, ever the composed French strategist, opened his mouth to offer reassurances, promising to file an official complaint after the race. But the words sounded hollow, bureaucratic, a gesture made too late to matter. Hamilton's eyes flashed with betrayal. In that moment, it was clear, this wasn't just about a racing incident. This was about trust. About loyalty. About feeling exposed and abandoned when he needed the full might of Ferrari behind him, shield up, sword drawn. The motorhome practically vibrated with the aftershock of Hamilton's fury. Even after he stalked away toward the driver's cool-down room, muttering under his breath, the team members left behind struggled to shake off the feeling that something vital had broken, or at least cracked, that afternoon. But the day's drama was only just beginning. Later, under the blazing lights of the podium ceremony, another scene unfolded, one that would set the paddock ablaze with gossip, fan speculation, and controversy for weeks to come. As the top three drivers climbed the steps, the tension was so palpable it could have been cut with a scalpel. The usual camaraderie, the shared smiles, the pats on the back, the quick jokes, was conspicuously absent. Instead, there was an awkward stiffness, an invisible chasm between Hamilton and the others. Lando Norris, freshly showered and trying his best to ease the prickly atmosphere, offered a casual, almost boyish comment as he sidled up beside Hamilton. "Good fight out there, Lewis," Norris said lightly, flashing a quick, nervous smile. "Hard racing, yeah." For a split second, it looked like Hamilton might ignore him entirely. His jaw was locked tight, his face an unreadable mask. Then, without warning, Hamilton turned to Norris, his eyes burning not just with anger, but with a deeper sense of betrayal, at the sport, at the officiating, at the endless politics that had haunted his entire career. Through clenched teeth, he growled under his breath. "Shut your mouth, Lando. Save your fake respect for someone who buys it." It was low. It was ice cold. It was real. Though the nearby podium microphones didn't pick up the full exchange, the words didn't stay secret for long. Professional lip readers caught it instantly, and by the time the champagne was sprayed half-heartedly into the heavy evening air, the whispers had already started. Within minutes, video clips flooded social media, slowed down, zoomed in, analyzed frame by frame. Analysts, pundits, and armchair experts exploded into frenzied debate. Was Lewis justified? Had Norris overstepped? Was this a sign of a deeper fracture among the driver brotherhood? Back in the paddock, reporters scrambled to piece together the behind-the-scenes narrative. Camera crews lingered near the Ferrari and McLaren hospitality units, hoping for a reaction. Team PR officers rushed to craft careful statements, trying to downplay the incident, insisting emotions were high after a tough race. But fans weren't buying it. The internet caught fire. #Lewis Unleashed trended globally within the hour. Threads dissecting every millisecond of Hamilton's body language racked up millions of views. Memes, opinion polls, and TikTok edits flooded timelines, some hailing Hamilton as the last true warrior of F1, others questioning if he had finally reached a breaking point after years of being the sport's lightning rod. Meanwhile, Hamilton himself remained silent. No post-race Instagram post. No Twitter acknowledgement. No carefully polished media statement. Instead, he retreated quietly into the night, the weight of a lifetime of battles heavy on his shoulders, leaving the world buzzing in his wake. And somewhere, amidst the chaos, one undeniable truth resonated louder than all the speculation. This wasn't just another race weekend. This was Lewis Hamilton, raw, unfiltered, untamed, fighting not just for points, but for principle. Fighting against a system he knew too well. Fighting, as always, for something bigger than himself. And win or lose, love him or hate him, one thing was certain. Lewis Hamilton was far from finished writing his story. He was just getting started. The tension on the podium was thick enough to slice with a knife. As the champagne sprayed and the cameras clicked furiously, capturing what the world assumed were triumphant, joyful celebrations, a very different story played out behind the grins. Lando Norris forced a smile for the flashes, that same polished, boyish grin he had perfected over years in the spotlight, but the tightness around his eyes betrayed him. His body was rigid, his hands slightly trembling as he clutched the oversized bottle of champagne. Lewis Hamilton, meanwhile, stood to his side, exuding an icy composure that only years of warfare at the pinnacle of motorsport could forge. Yet the sharp side-eye glances that darted between them spoke volumes. Volumes that the official post-race narrative would never dare print. Beneath the golden desert lights of Jeddah, amidst the glitter and glamour of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, a line had been crossed. And everyone, from the team principals in their VIP boxes to the mechanics wiping sweat from their brows, could feel it. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the podium ceremony wrapped up and the national anthems faded into the warm Arabian night, the drivers filed backstage, away from the gaze of fans and media. In the narrow, sterile corridors lined with white tiles and fluorescent lights, the tension erupted into something raw and visceral. Hamilton, never one to shy away from a confrontation when principle demanded it, closed the distance between them in a heartbeat. No cameras. No microphones. Just raw, unfiltered emotion. He leaned in, close enough that Norris could feel the heat radiating off him after 50 laps of brutal combat, and spoke in a low, cutting voice, sharp enough that the few nearby team officials, stewards, and media handlers couldn't help but overhear. "If you ever pull that kind of stunt again," Hamilton hissed, his voice steady but laced with venom, "I won't be so kind next time. You'll see what real hard racing looks like." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, one forged through years of battling the fiercest competitors Formula One had to offer, from Alonso to Vettel to Verstappen. Hamilton's resume was built on surviving and conquering these wars, and he was making it very clear that if Norris wanted to dance on that battlefield, he better be ready to bleed. For a heartbeat, the air between them crackled with the electricity of impending violence. But Norris, refusing to show weakness, or perhaps too young, too headstrong to recognize the magnitude of what he was provoking, simply flashed that maddening grin. The grin he often used to mask nerves, to hide uncertainty, to project an aura of fearless cockiness. "Looking forward to it, old man," Norris quipped, the words slipping out before his brain could apply any filters. His voice was light, almost mocking, but his eyes betrayed the flicker of unease. He knew he had poked the lion. He just didn't know yet how deeply. Instantly, McLaren and Mercedes personnel stepped in, moving between them with the well-practiced urgency of people who had seen too many conflicts flare out of control. PR managers murmured platitudes about keeping it professional. Team managers pulled their drivers in opposite directions like parents separating squabbling siblings. But the damage was done. The seeds had been planted, dark, stubborn seeds that would grow in the fertile soil of bruised egos, championship ambitions, and national pride. What had once been a respectful, almost fraternal dynamic between Britain's past and future stars had fractured under the heat of fierce competition. And the entire paddock, Every journalist, every mechanic, every strategist huddled over their telemetry screens knew it. The battle lines had been drawn. Hamilton versus Norris. The king versus the young pretender. Respect had been replaced by resentment. Professional courtesy replaced by personal vendetta. What was once a friendly rivalry had mutated, under the merciless lights of Jeddah, into something far darker. Something nuclear. Whispers rippled through the paddock that night, carried by the desert winds. Did you hear what Hamilton said? Norris didn't back down. This is going to get ugly. By the time the teams packed up their garages and the engineers folded away the pit walls, everyone could feel it in their bones. The 2025 Formula One season had just gained something it hadn't truly seen in years. A personal grudge match between two titanic talents, each unwilling to yield, each determined to carve their name into history, no matter the cost. And somewhere, deep inside their racing souls, both men knew, the war had only just begun.